This is Huawei's P60 Pro, their new flagship camera phone. There have been plenty of impressive cameras on phones lately, so has Huawei been able to keep up, and can it compete with them despite the lack of Google services? I'm Will for GSM Arena, and let's find out in our Huawei P60 Pro review. The Huawei P60 Pro looks to impress consumers with its high-end specs and cameras, despite the downsides of not having 5G access or Google services on board. One neat feature is that, like last year's Mate 50 Pro, the main cam has a variable aperture lens. And compared to the previous P50 Pro, there's an upgraded display, a new chipset, a bigger battery, and faster charging. The design here is super fresh and clean, thanks to a glass back that looks like pearl marble. If that's not your cup of tea, the phone is also available in more standard-looking colorways too. The vertical camera design is curious, with a large circle and two smaller dots, and both the back and front curve into an aluminum frame. Overall, the phone feels comfy in hand, but a bit slippery. Just like last year's model, the P60 Pro is IP68 rated against water and dust too. On the front of the phone is a 6.67-inch curved LTPO OLED display with a 2700 by 1220 resolution. There's a fast 120Hz refresh rate and Kunlun glass protection. The LTPO tech is something new here. It means the refresh rate should be extra adaptive to save energy. Huawei claims it can dial down from 120Hz to just 1 Hz while idling, but this is something we weren't able to capture with the integrated refresh rate counter. This screen's max brightness is higher than the previous models. We measured a maximum of about 580 nits when using the manual brightness slider, and this can boost to 1130 nits when you're in auto mode in bright conditions. The screen is contrasty, and with a pixel density of 444 ppi, content is extra sharp too. There's support for 10-bit color and HDR10+, and the color accuracy can be excellent based on the color settings you choose. For audio, the P60 Pro has a pair of stereo speakers. They have good loudness, and the audio quality is excellent, with great vocals and highs, and good bass too. The phone has an optical under-display fingerprint reader for biometrics. And you can get 256 or 512 gigs of storage on the P60 Pro, and that's expandable by using a Huawei Nano memory card. The interface of the P60 Pro is EMUI 13.1. It's based on Android, but brings quite a different experience from your typical Android phone. That's because you don't have Google services or apps here. Instead, EMUI 13 relies on Huawei services and apps, and their proprietary App Gallery app store. The app selection in App Gallery is constantly growing, and you can get many popular apps here. There are still some notable omissions compared to Google Play though. But through the integrated pedal search, you can find apps outside the gallery, like developers' websites and other app repositories, and install them from there. And now there are options like Gbox, a virtual machine which acts as a workaround by letting you install and run Google Apps. So the situation is improving a lot for people who don't want to cut their ties with Google. Besides that, EMUI is feature-packed and works well. You get a separate notification center and control center, similar to what you get from Apple or Xiaomi. The leftmost home screen is customizable and can show you several things, including a newsfeed and the weather. Swiping down anywhere on the home screen opens up a system-wide search. EMUI 13 supports large folders, which organize apps into a more compact space, but the apps remain accessible with a single touch. There's support for combined widgets. You can combine 3 widgets into one. Or you can stack widgets on top of each other. And since the phone has an IR blaster, you can use it to control appliances remotely. The chipset of the Huawei P60 Pro is a Qualcomm Snapdragon 8 Plus Gen 1, last year's top silicon for Android flagships. These days, it finds itself just a tad outdated because the newest flagships are coming out with a next-gen Snapdragon 8 Gen 2. Additionally, because Huawei doesn't have access to 5G modems, this is a custom version of the chipset, which is limited to 4G connectivity. Still, when it comes to performance, the P60 Pro is far from disappointing. It achieves high benchmark scores on the level of 2022's top phones, and there's more than enough power here for smooth multitasking and heavy gaming. The thermal management here is underwhelming though. During our prolonged stress tests, the phone often throttled down the performance significantly. We didn't notice issues in real life though. The P60 Pro has a larger battery capacity than last year, 4,815 mAh versus 4,360, and the battery life is much better here. The new model earned an endurance rating of 96 hours, which is good for the class and a significant improvement over the P50 Pro. Charging has improved too. It's 88 watts now, and the adapter has both a USB-C and a USB-A port. With it, in the default charging settings, we were able to top up the phone from 0 to 86% in half an hour. There's also support for 50-watt wireless charging and reverse wireless charging. Now onto the P60 Pro's cameras. There's a 48-megapixel main cam, a 48-megapixel 3.5x telephoto zoom, and a 13-megapixel ultra-wide cam. The main cam features a truly variable aperture, which you can adjust in a range between f1.4 and f4.0. That's something you can't do on any other phone besides the Huawei Mate 50 Pro. The variable aperture means you can control the depth of field and the amount of light that gets through to the sensor. Shooting at the largest f1.4 aperture will give you a very shallow depth of field and a natural bokeh blur in the background. Meanwhile, smaller apertures are ideal for when you need a more in-focus background. Photos from the main cam come out in 12 megapixels by default, and the auto mode used an f2.0 aperture for all of them. They're excellent, with an incredible amount of detail, balanced sharpness, and a pleasant, natural-looking rendition. This main camera uses a smaller sensor than the 1-inch type sensors found on other top camera phones, but it still manages to keep up when it comes to the resolve detail. Plus, the contrast is great, the colors are accurate, and the dynamic range is wide too. Although you can get nice natural bokeh, there's also a portrait mode, which is quite proficient. There are 3 zoom levels to choose from. 1x and 2x zoomed portraits are taken with the main cam. Then there are the 3.5x zoomed portraits. They're just as impressive and taken with the telephoto camera. The 90mm telephoto cam has an f2.1 lens, one of the widest apertures we've seen on such a camera. 3.5x zoomed photos we shot are magnificent, with abundant detail, spot-on sharpness, and no noise. The colors are consistent with the main cam, and the dynamic range is wide but not over the top. This camera can focus from as close as 10 centimeters, and you can use it to shoot macro close-ups. These are superb, with good sharpness and exposure, pleasant colors, and nice bokeh in the background. The ultra-wide camera shoots photos which are incredible for this sort of cam. They offer an extra wide field of view and provide a ton of detail with natural rendition. There's excellent sharpness, wide dynamic range, and no noise. The colors match the other cameras as well. And since this camera also has autofocus, you can again use it to take close-up shots. They're not quite as great as those from the zoom camera though. In low light, the P60 Pro's main cam sticks to its f1.4 aperture by default. The photos we captured are rich in detail and noise-free. The exposure is balanced, bright enough but not over the top. There's good contrast and the dynamic range is quite wide too, and the color rendition is consistently great. You can enable a dedicated night mode, which takes a couple of seconds to process each shot. The photos are unrealistically bright and a bit less detailed, but you do get better developed shadows and skies. Low light shots taken with a telephoto cam are quite alright. They have good sharpness, great exposure, and low noise. The dynamic range is very good, and the colors are accurate. The detail level is just mediocre though. At least, the new sensor shift stabilization works really well, and even at 10x zoom, the photos come out very well. The night mode makes a nice improvement on the zoomed photos. These images are more detailed, with better developed shadows and skies, and a wider dynamic range. Sometimes the colors could be a little off though, like oversaturated, or experience a reddish tint. The low-light photos from the ultra-wide camera are superb. They are well exposed, with a lot of detail and excellent colors. The noise is minimal, and the overall rendition is quite nice. The night mode on the ultra-wide camera typically requires 4 seconds, and it may or may not lead to better detail. The same applies for the sky and the shadows. Sometimes they're nicer, but not in every scene. The biggest issue though is a dialed up color saturation and noticeable red tinge in some of these photos. For selfies, you have 3 zoom levels to choose from. 0.6x is the widest, and then there's 0.8x and 1x. They all appear equally detailed and sharp, so it seems these are achieved by cropping from the widest view. The subject is always well exposed, colors look good, and the dynamic range is quite wide. The P60 Pro can record video in up to 4K resolution at 60 FPS with all of its cameras. The 4K videos from the main camera are noise-free, with accurate colors, good contrast, and wide dynamic range. The resolve detail is just mediocre though, especially when it comes to foliage. The telephoto camera shoots videos at 4x zoom by default. These are alright, the detail is enough, the noise is low, and the colors are accurate. The dynamic range is quite wide too. We were impressed when using the zoom camera to take close-up telemacro videos. There's plenty of detail here, lovely colors, and the natural bokeh is quite nice. 4K videos from the ultra-wide camera are great. The footage is detailed, even around the corners, and you get accurate colors, no noise, and wide dynamic range. In low light, the videos from the main cam are quite good. There's enough resolve detail, adequate contrast and dynamic range, saturated colors, and well-handled noise. The 4x zoomed low-light videos are decent. The detail level is alright, and there's tolerable noise and good exposure. The dynamic range isn't bad, and the colors are saturated. The low-light clips from the ultra-wide camera are somewhat underexposed, but with passable detail, low noise, and good color saturation. As far as stabilization goes, you get always-on EIS on the main, ultra-wide, and selfie cams. Overall, you get nicely stabilized footage. So that's the Huawei P60 Pro. It's a really nice flagship all around, with a unique and premium design, a nice display, and better battery life and charging than last year's model. Plus the cameras here are simply awesome. It isn't a perfect phone though. The chipset is a bit outdated for a flagship, and we've seen better video recording from the competition. And of course, you don't get 5G connectivity or Google services. At least now there are workarounds like Gbox, so you can still manage to run your Google apps here. Overall, if you're willing to make those compromises, the Huawei P60 Pro is a solid choice if you're looking for a high-end camera phone. Thanks for watching, guys. If you're looking for alternatives to the Huawei P60 Pro, you could start off with the Xiaomi 13 Ultra, or you might consider the Samsung Galaxy S23 Ultra. Let us know what you think, and I'll see you on the next one.